The morning my father died, my brother stood in his hospital room, dividing his empire while his body was still warm. I watched from the doorway as Dmitry pulled out his phone, already calling our lawyers about the company transition. Sterling had his laptop open, calculating property values. Neither of them noticed when the heart monitor finally went silent at 6:47 a.m. They were too busy planning who would get the Manhattan penthouse. The board meeting is at 9, Dmitry said, not even looking at our father's still form. We need to secure the leadership transition before the stock market opens. Sterling nodded, his fingers flying across his keyboard. I'll handle the media statement. We can't let this affect share prices. Me? I stood there holding my father's cold hand, wondering when my brothers had become strangers. I was 18 years old, and my life had just shifted in a way I couldn't have imagined. The will had been clear, or so everyone thought. My brothers inherited everything: the sprawling estate, the company shares, the luxury cars, the investments that totaled $29 million. And me, I received a locked phone, heavy in my hand, with a tiny note attached. Happy birthday, it said. No instructions, no context, just the device that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. I stared at it, unsure if it was a gift or a curse. The phone felt like a puzzle, a key to a secret my father had hidden from the world, and even from his own sons. I couldn't shake the feeling that the small black device carried the truth about why my brothers were so cold, so calculating, and perhaps why my father had left me something entirely different. Little did I know, that phone would reveal lies, betrayals, and a fortune that even Dmitry and Sterling couldn't touch. My 18th birthday was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it marked the beginning of a battle for truth, inheritance, and justice. The first time I truly understood the scale of my father's empire was in the weeks after his funeral. Dmitry and Sterling moved with a precision I hadn't realized they possessed, or perhaps had always possessed, hidden beneath the surface of brotherly smiles. They attended board meetings, called investors, and signed contracts like generals commanding an army. Every phone call, every signature was a small battle in a war I had never been invited to fight. And I had the locked phone. At first, I tried to ignore it. I wanted to mourn, to grieve in private, but the device was a constant weight in my pocket, a reminder that I had been deliberately excluded. I asked Dmitry casually if he knew anything about it. It's just a backup, probably an old company phone, he said, eyes flicking away. Sterling shrugged when I mentioned it, his fingers tapping on his laptop as if the question had already been filed away in the category of irrelevant. But I knew better. My father had never been careless with his secrets. The phone was sleek, black, and cold to the touch. No password hints, no notes, only a faint cryptic engraving on the back. Trust yourself, not them. I spent hours staring at it, wondering if this was a joke, a test, or perhaps a trap. My father had always been a man who planned 10 steps ahead, and the thought that he might have left something vital for me while everyone else got the headlines and the assets sent a thrill. And a fear through me. School and social life blurred into insignificance. While my brothers flaunted their new privileges, Dmitry in his chauffeured car, Sterling in a penthouse overlooking the skyline, I stayed up at night, researching, experimenting, trying to unlock the device. I reached out to old family friends, tech-savvy cousins, anyone who might shed light. Each failed attempt increased my frustration and determination. I realized I wasn't just trying to unlock a phone. I was trying to unlock my father's intentions. Meanwhile, subtle cracks in my brother's armor began to show. Dmitry's arrogance made him predictable. Sterling's impatience led to careless emails. They were humans after all, not untouchable overlords. And the more I watched, the more I saw that the empire wasn't as invincible as it seemed. There were gaps, oversights, and opportunities, and the phone might hold the blueprint to exploit them. I began keeping notes, tracing company transactions, mapping properties, and even checking bank records where I could. Each discovery was like a puzzle piece falling into place. Sometimes the pieces were shocking. Private investments, undisclosed properties, hints at family disputes I had never known about. Every clue made the locked phone feel more urgent, more alive. It wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge. By the time I reached the end of my 18th year, I realized something important. The phone wasn't just about money. It was about truth, control, and legacy. My father hadn't simply left me a device. He had left me a choice, to step into the shadows of his empire, underestimated by everyone, and find the secrets he had hidden, or to walk away, as everyone expected me to. A sidelined brother in a family of sharks. I couldn't walk away. The first clue I uncovered on the phone hinted at hidden accounts, offshore investments, and private messages that revealed more than just wealth. It revealed betrayal. And I knew, at that moment, that my 18th birthday wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a war I had no choice but to fight. Rising action. Unlocking the phone wasn't just a technical challenge. It was a test of patience, persistence, and intuition. Each failed attempt only made me more determined. I tried passcodes I thought my father might use, patterns he favored, and even dates significant to our family. Nothing worked. It was as if the device was deliberately taunting me, forcing me to prove I was worthy of the secrets it contained. I began digging deeper into my father's old files, scattered across his home office, safe deposit boxes, and digital archives. Every document, letter, and ledger hinted at something bigger than just money. He had left breadcrumbs, carefully hidden references that seemed random at first, a note about a trustee in Switzerland, a receipt for a coded banking app, a message mentioning trust yourself, not them. Slowly, a picture emerged. My father had anticipated my brother's ruthlessness and my own curiosity. He had built a safety net of secrets, accessible only to me if I had the wit and courage to uncover them. Meanwhile, my brother's confidence only made my investigation more urgent. Dmitry flaunted his control over the company, issuing orders and making deals as if the empire belonged solely to him. Sterling played the part of the diplomatic, calm executive, but subtle missteps revealed cracks. Every careless move, every email sent without encryption, every leaked financial report became a potential lead. I realized the empire was a house of cards, and the phone was the blueprint to bring it all into focus. One night, I finally found a clue that changed everything. A backup drive tucked inside my father's desk, containing encrypted files linked to the phone. Using what I had learned, I managed to bypass the first layer of security. The phone lit up, displaying a series of messages and coded spreadsheets. I had broken the first barrier, but the real secrets were still hidden behind another, far more sophisticated layer. The messages hinted at hidden accounts, undisclosed properties, and even correspondence that revealed my brother's manipulations. It wasn't just about inheritance. It was about control, deception, and long-standing schemes my father had anticipated. I started mapping every clue, connecting the dots, and creating a strategy. Each discovery made my brother's world seem smaller and more vulnerable. As the pieces fell into place, the tension within our family became palpable. Dmitry and Sterling, unaware of my progress, continued their power plays, making them predictable. I began planning subtle moves to test their reactions, sending anonymous tips to auditors, monitoring their financial patterns, and quietly verifying ownership of certain assets. Every small step revealed more about the depth of their deception, and more about the scale of what my father had left me. By the end of this phase, it was clear. I was no longer a sidelined, powerless 18-year-old. I had become a strategist, armed with knowledge, patience, and a phone that held the key to toppling the carefully constructed world my brothers thought they controlled. The stakes were higher than ever, and the first major confrontation, the moment when the phone's secrets would truly reshape everything, was fast approaching. Climax. The day I finally unlocked the phone, the world seemed to tilt beneath me. Every layer of encryption fell away like peeling back decades of deception. Inside, I discovered spreadsheets, legal documents, and private messages my father had hidden from everyone, including my brothers. The files revealed not just hidden assets, but secret trusts, offshore accounts, and investments made specifically for me. My father had anticipated my brother's greed, their need to control, and he had prepared a safeguard, a plan to ensure that I would inherit what was rightfully mine if I proved worthy. As I scrolled through the messages, one in particular made my stomach twist. My father had written directly to me, "Dmitry and Sterling will take what they can see. What they cannot see belongs to you. Trust the phone. Trust yourself." It wasn't just advice, it was a roadmap. The empire my brothers thought they controlled was fractured, and I held the master key. I realized the full scale of the deception. My brothers had been manipulating every detail: stock valuations, property transfers, even public announcements about the estate. They assumed I was too young, too naive, too powerless to notice. But I had evidence that could expose their schemes, reclaim my rightful inheritance, and shift the power balance entirely. I also discovered personal betrayals I hadn't anticipated. Messages between my brothers and certain board members revealed underhanded deals, backroom agreements, and attempts to isolate me completely. Every word was a dagger, every file a weapon. My father's foresight was genius, but executing the plan required precision. I couldn't act recklessly. One wrong move could trigger disaster, alert my brothers, or jeopardize the legacy my father had entrusted to me. That evening, I confronted Dimitri and Sterling. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply placed the phone on the table, unlocked, displaying the secrets they thought were hidden. Silence filled the room. Their confident expressions faltered, suspicion and panic flickering across their faces. How did you get that? Dimitri finally whispered, voice tight. I leaned back, calm, steady, and unshakable. The phone was never meant for you, I said. It's my inheritance. The empire isn't yours. It never was. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted irreversibly. The empire my brothers thought was theirs alone was suddenly within my reach. I wasn't just a sideline sibling anymore. I was the one holding the ultimate truth. And with it, the leverage to reclaim everything my father had secretly secured for me. The battle had reached its peak. What followed would determine not just the inheritance, but the fate of the family itself. Rihook. With the phone on the table, my brother's expressions shifted from shock to panic, but I stayed calm. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Every sleepless night, every puzzle, every careful observation had led to this. I knew that the information I held wasn't just proof of my inheritance. It was a weapon. And like any weapon, it needed precision, strategy, and patience. The first thing I did was not confront them further. I didn't want to alert them to the depth of what I had uncovered. Instead, I began quietly documenting everything. Every message, every spreadsheet, every secret account was copied and verified. I cross-referenced the files with public records, corporate statements, and hidden trusts. By the end of the night, I had created a detailed map of the empire, highlighting weaknesses, unreported assets, and the intricate web of deception my brothers had spun to consolidate power. I realized that sheer confrontation wasn't enough. Dimitri and Sterling were experienced manipulators. They thrived on arrogance, charm, and intimidation. They had fooled the family, the board, and even some of the lawyers. But knowledge gave me leverage, and timing would give me control. I started setting subtle traps, test emails, minor audits, and discreet inquiries that would reveal cracks in their facade without them realizing I was orchestrating it all. The next morning, Dimitri and Sterling acted as though nothing had changed. They were visibly on edge, but they continued their routine, oblivious to the fact that the empire they believed was secure was now under silent scrutiny. I maintained a neutral front, attending board meetings and family gatherings, all while subtly guiding events to expose inconsistencies. Every financial misstep, every casual boast, became evidence for the story the phone had revealed. It wasn't just about money anymore. I realized that my father's gift was also a lesson. Understanding human nature, patience, and the power of observation. I needed to stay calm while my brothers acted recklessly, and in doing so, the balance of power would shift in my favor. I started reaching out to trusted family friends, advisors, and even some board members who had been left in the dark. Carefully, I built a coalition of awareness around me, ensuring that when the moment came, I wouldn't be alone. As days turned into weeks, I pieced together the full extent of the empire that was mine by right and hidden by design. Real estate investments, private equity funds, and international trusts were all documented. The locked phone had revealed secrets that went far beyond my initial understanding. Secrets that could topple my brother's perceived control and secure the inheritance my father had planned for me. By the end of this rehook phase, I understood that patience and subtlety were just as powerful as confrontation. Dimitri and Sterling were still blinded by their own hubris, unaware that the smallest misstep could unravel everything. And I was ready, armed with knowledge, strategy, and the foresight my father had built into the phone. I was preparing to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The empire wasn't just mine to inherit, it was mine to command. Impact and resolution. The first waves of impact hit quietly, but powerfully. With the evidence from the phone meticulously organized, I approached key legal advisors and financial auditors, not to attack, but to verify the truths my father had hidden. Every hidden account, undisclosed property, and secret trust was confirmed. The empire I had thought my brothers completely controlled was, in fact, built with deliberate gaps that only I could access. My father's foresight had given me the advantage. My patience and strategy made it real. When I first confronted Dimitri and Sterling with documented evidence, it wasn't explosive drama. I didn't need shouting, threats, or ultimatums. The truth spoke for itself. Their initial arrogance cracked, replaced by anger and disbelief. Dimitri's face turned red as he read the spreadsheets. Sterling's hands trembled slightly over his laptop. They had assumed I was powerless, naive, and uninformed. But now, every secret, every hidden asset, every manipulated deal lay bare before them. The impact wasn't just financial, It was psychological. My brother's confidence, the smug certainty with which they had divided our father's empire, shattered. I could see them recalculating, re-strategizing in real time, trying to anticipate my next move. But I stayed 2 steps ahead. I had time on my side, and the phone had given me more than numbers. It had given me insight into the vulnerabilities of those who believed themselves untouchable. With the empire partially exposed, I began to reclaim assets that had always been intended for me. The process was methodical. Offshore accounts were activated, trusts released, and corporate shares reallocated. Each transaction was a quiet victory, a reclaiming of both wealth and dignity. My father had ensured I could execute this without destroying the company or creating unnecessary chaos, and I followed the blueprint meticulously. The family dynamics began to shift as well. Dimitri and Sterling could no longer dominate conversations or decision-making. Board members who had once deferred to them now treated me as an equal, if not a superior authority. The balance of power had tipped, and I felt the weight of responsibility for both the empire and my father's legacy. This wasn't just revenge, it was restoration, justice, and fulfillment of a plan decades in the making. Emotionally, I felt a strange mix of triumph and melancholy. My father's trust had been vindicated, and yet, the process revealed just how little my brothers had understood about loyalty, integrity, and foresight. I realized that wealth alone was meaningless without vision, and I now carried the burden, and the honor, of executing it correctly. By the end of this phase, the phone had proven its purpose. What had begun as a cryptic locked device on my 18th birthday had transformed my life completely. I had gone from powerless and overlooked to knowledgeable, strategic, and in command. The empire wasn't just inherited, it was finally in the hands of the son who had earned it. Not through birthright alone, but through wisdom, patience, and perseverance. The first stage of resolution was complete, yet I knew the journey wasn't over. Dimitri and Sterling were still in the picture, still dangerous, and still unpredictable. But now, armed with knowledge, evidence, and strategy, I was ready for the next stage, the final moves that would secure my father's empire and reveal the full truth behind the inheritance. Another climax weeks of careful planning led to this moment. Every move, every observation, every detail from the phone's secrets had prepared me for a confrontation that was not just about money, but about control, trust, and legacy. I had learned my brothers' patterns, anticipated their decisions, and positioned myself in ways they couldn't foresee. The boardroom was tense. Dimitri, Sterling, and I sat across from one another, the city skyline glowing through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind us. It was my stage, my moment to reveal not only the truth of the empire, but the hidden intentions my father had left for me. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence stretch, letting them feel the unease of the unknown. The phone rested on the table, unlocked, its screen displaying an encrypted list of assets, accounts, and correspondence. Dimitri's gaze darted nervously. Sterling's fingers drummed on the polished oak table. They had no idea what I had uncovered. Then, slowly, I began to lay out the truth. Every hidden trust, every offshore account, every secret investment my father had established for me was exposed. I showed how my brothers had tried to manipulate the inheritance, how they had underestimated my awareness, and how my father had built a safeguard only I could access. The reactions were instantaneous. Dimitri's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with anger and disbelief. Sterling's composed exterior cracked, revealing panic and frustration. Their plans, their arrogance, their assumption of total control, all of it unraveled in real time. They realized that the empire they had claimed was not theirs to fully command, and that I had the power to reclaim it piece by piece. But the climax wasn't only about confrontation, it was about strategy. I didn't need to fight recklessly. Instead, I leveraged the information from the phone to quietly secure legal and financial validation for my claims. Each revelation I shared was backed with undeniable proof. Every attempt they made to dispute or deny it faltered under scrutiny. My father had prepared me for this, and I executed his plan flawlessly. By the end of the meeting, the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Dimitri and Sterling, once untouchable in their arrogance, were forced into a defensive posture. I had turned their own empire against them, not with brute force, but with insight, strategy, and the foresight my father had instilled in me. The phone, once a cryptic puzzle, had become my ultimate weapon, and the battle for the $29 million empire was finally tipping in my favor. In that room, the lines were drawn. The empire's control was no longer a given for my brothers. I had uncovered the truth, wielded it strategically, and set the stage for the final reclamation of my father's legacy. The story was far from over, but for the first time, I was no longer powerless. I was the one holding the key to the empire and the authority to determine the outcome. Rehook again. The days after the boardroom confrontation were a delicate dance. Dimitri and Sterling were visibly shaken, but they weren't defeated. They adapted quickly, attempting to regain control, testing boundaries, and subtly probing for weaknesses in my strategy. But I had the advantage. I wasn't reacting blindly, I was anticipating, calculating, and using every secret the phone had revealed to stay 2 steps ahead. I started by consolidating allies. Some board members had been skeptical of Dimitri's leadership, quietly frustrated with Sterling's overconfidence, and wary of the power imbalance. I approached them discreetly, presenting facts from the phone, showing undeniable proof of my rightful claims, and emphasizing stability for the company. Slowly the tide shifted. The board began to see me not as the sidelined youngest son, but as the heir with vision, knowledge, and legitimacy. Meanwhile, Dimitri and Sterling tried to rally support, but every move I anticipated. I had mapped out every asset, every account, and every contingency my father had put in place. With each strategic decision I made, reallocating shares, activating trusts, securing financial documentation, I tightened my control without immediate confrontation. My brother's arrogance worked against them. They underestimated my patience and subtlety. The phone became more than a tool. It was a compass, guiding me through layers of deception. It revealed insider communications, off-the-record promises, and hidden instructions that my father had embedded for me. Using this knowledge, I was able to quietly correct previous misallocations and secure my position within the empire. Every small victory was a ripple that disrupted my brother's confidence and control. Even in private family moments, I noticed their subtle desperation. Dimitri's smirks were forced. Sterling's casual comments laced with tension. They began second-guessing themselves, unsure of what I knew or how I had anticipated their moves. Each misstep they made only strengthened my position and reminded me of the lesson my father had left me. Power is less about confrontation and more about timing, foresight, and control of information. By the end of this phase, I was no longer just reclaiming inheritance. I was reshaping the entire dynamic of the family. The empire, once assumed to be my brother's domain, was now balanced. They still held influence, but my authority, backed by the truths the phone had revealed, could no longer be ignored. I had transformed from the sidelined youngest son into a strategist capable of dismantling carefully constructed facades without ever revealing the full extent of my knowledge. The stage was set for the final resolution. Dimitri and Sterling would have to either accept the reality of my position or risk losing everything their arrogance had convinced them was untouchable. And I knew, deep down, that the phone, once a simple birthday gift, was the key to rewriting my family's legacy forever. Impact and resolution. The full weight of the phone's secrets finally began to settle into reality. Dimitri and Sterling, once untouchable in their arrogance, were now aware that the tide had turned. Every calculated step I had taken, every trust activated, every account verified, every ally quietly secured, was coming to fruition. The empire, once entirely in their hands, was now balanced, with me firmly positioned as a rightful heir. I began to execute the final pieces of the plan my father had left for me. Offshore accounts were officially transferred under my name, undisclosed properties legally reclaimed, and corporate shares reallocated. Each step was backed by evidence, each decision validated by legal counsel, and each move left my brothers scrambling to catch up. What had started as a cryptic phone on my 18th birthday had grown into a full blueprint for restoring fairness and reclaiming my father's vision. Emotionally, the impact was just as profound as the financial victory. For years I'd felt powerless, overlooked, and betrayed. The phone didn't just provide money or assets, it gave me the knowledge to understand my family, see through the facade my brothers had created, and take control of my own destiny. For the first time, I felt a balance between power and justice. Dimitri and Sterling were forced to acknowledge my position. Their arrogance cracked under the undeniable truth. I had not only discovered the secrets they had ignored, but I had used them with patience, precision, and foresight. The dynamic in family meetings, boardrooms, and even casual gatherings changed. Respect was no longer optional. It was demanded, quietly but unmistakably. The phone also revealed personal truths that went beyond money. Messages from my father indicated his deep understanding of each son's character, his anticipation of conflicts, and his desire to ensure fairness even after his death. This knowledge gave me closure, not just power. I realized that my father had always been watching, guiding, and preparing me for this moment. By the end of this resolution phase, I had secured my rightful inheritance, reclaimed my father's legacy, and established authority within the family and empire. Dimitri and Sterling could no longer dominate, manipulate, or exclude me. The empire was no longer theirs alone. It was now a shared responsibility, balanced by justice, foresight, and the careful execution of the secrets hidden in a simple, locked phone. Most importantly, I had proven to myself that knowledge, patience, and strategy could overcome arrogance and entitlement. The phone, once a mysterious gift, had become a symbol of empowerment. It had transformed me from the overlooked youngest son into a rightful heir, capable of reclaiming not just wealth, but the respect, trust, and legacy my father had always intended for me. Fallout. The aftermath of reclaiming my inheritance was quiet but profound. Dimitri and Sterling retreated into cautious behavior, their arrogance replaced by careful calculation. The empire was no longer theirs to dominate. It was shared, balanced, and tempered by the knowledge and strategy my father had instilled in me through that locked phone. I felt a mix of triumph and reflection. The phone had done more than reveal hidden accounts. It had taught me patience, foresight, and the power of observation. My father's trust had been justified, and I had proven that age, youth, or oversight didn't determine capability, knowledge, and execution did. Family dynamics shifted permanently. My brothers had to acknowledge my authority and respect my decisions, both in personal matters and in business. Relationships, once fractured by betrayal and envy, began to stabilize, albeit cautiously. The lessons of trust, vigilance, and strategy had been written in sharp relief, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not repeat. As for me, I had grown in ways I could never have anticipated. The phone had turned my 18th birthday from a moment of exclusion into the start of a life-altering journey. I had inherited far more than wealth. I had inherited understanding, responsibility, and the ability to navigate a complex world with precision and integrity. In the end, the empire was secured, my place established, and my father's vision fulfilled. Dimitri and Sterling learned that power without foresight was fragile, and I learned that patience, knowledge, and careful action could turn even the smallest opportunity, a locked phone, into a lifetime of influence and justice. My 18th birthday had begun with exclusion, betrayal, and uncertainty. It ended with revelation, reclamation, and the promise of a future I was ready to command.